All right. Well, good morning. My name is Dwayne Spearman. Welcome to Directional Bible Ministries. This is a teaching ministry that's called to encourage, disciple, and challenge the people of God. Today is October the 7th, and we are continuing to work our way through the book of Acts together. We are in Acts chapter number 21, I believe. Acts chapter number 21. Let's see. Last time we were together, we got down to verse number 25. So, all right. Good morning, Matt. Good morning, Scott. God bless you guys. Hope you're doing well today. It's a little nippy here in Central Virginia. I think it's in the lower 50s. I love fall, man. The leaves are starting to change. It's beautiful for sure. So nothing wrong with fall. Fall's a beautiful time of year. All right, so yesterday, we did 15 through 25. So today, we're going to pick up, we are in chapter number 21. This is where Paul is visiting with James in Jerusalem. He's finally made it back to Jerusalem. He's been talking about trying to get back to Jerusalem. He's here. And just for a little context, we'll just pick up and read in verse number 17, then we'll get down in verse number 25 and start commentating. How's that? When they were come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. Well, so far so good. It was pretty much all downhill from there. And the brethren received us gladly, and the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. So they're at the church in Jerusalem. And when they had saluted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. And of course, they are much more concerned with Paul's ministry to the Gentiles, because that was the agreement that they had reached at the Jerusalem Council, that they would continue preaching the kingdom gospel to the nation of Israel, while Paul would begin to or take his ministry of grace to the Gentiles. And of course, Paul preached to both. They were all over the place, but they were particularly interested in what God was doing among the Gentiles. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord, and they said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous for the law. So as Paul is giving an update about what God is doing among the Gentiles, they give an update about what God is continuing to do among the Jews. And they say there's many thousands of them which believe. Believe what? Which believe the kingdom gospel, and they are zealous of the law. Zealous of the law? What's there to celebrate there? I thought we wasn't under the law. Well, if you take the Acts 2 model, then yeah, there's a problem here. And you're going to have to do some kind of explaining about what's going on there. Well, there's nothing to explain away here. They were preaching a kingdom gospel, which was still very much under Mosaic Law. And Paul was preaching a grace gospel, which was not. It's pretty much that simple. And they are informed of thee, that thou teachest all the Jews. Who's they? The Jews which were believing and were zealous of the law. The Jews that had accepted the kingdom gospel, the king and his kingdom. They are the ones that are informed of you, Paul, that you're teaching all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. And you're telling them that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after their customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Now, again, the elders and James, they're not the one accusing Paul here. They're saying that the Jews that had believed and were zealous for the law, they were hearing rumors that Paul was teaching the Jews. They didn't care what he was teaching the Gentiles, but that he was teaching the Jews to forsake Moses, saying they ought not to circumcise their children and to walk after the customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that you are come. In other words, you better prepare an answer, because they're going to ask. Do therefore this that we say to thee. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. So now they're organizing this photo op, if you will, to prove that Paul was not teaching the Jews to forsake the law of Moses. We have these 4 men which have taken the same vow that you've taken, which was obviously, it appears to be a Nazirite vow. The text is becoming a little clearer here. I mean, I don't know, we're 90-ish% positive this was a Nazirite vow. Take them, these 4 guys, and purify yourself with them, and be at charges with them, and they will shave their heads. Now, remember, Paul had already shaved his head back in chapter 18, verse number 8. Chapter 18, verse number 18, he had already taken this Nazirite vow. And all may know that those things whereof they being the believing Jews, were informed concerning thee are nothing. In other words, that it's not true that you're teaching the Jews to forsake the law of Moses and to not circumcise their children and to not walk according to the customs, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly, and you're keeping the law. And understand, Paul was Jewish. He was a Jew. And in this very unique period of time, Paul is preaching both a kingdom gospel and a grace gospel. And as touching the Gentiles, which believe, we have written and concluded. Now, as touching the Gentiles that believe, in other words, they're kind of going back to Paul's original update about what God is doing among the Gentiles with the grace gospel, Paul's gospel, his ministry. We, as in regards to them, we believe what? The grace gospel. We have written and concluded that they observe no such thing. In other words, they don't have to keep the law of Moses, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols and from blood and from strangled and from fornication. And of course, that's exactly what they told them at the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter number 15. And again, I mentioned this yesterday, the more I study, the more confused I am that most of the church today simply cannot see this. It's right in front of them, but I have mercy and I have compassion because I did the same thing. We all approach the scripture with a filter that is usually given to us. We don't take the time to study it for ourselves. You know, who was it? Chuck Swindoll said life is 99% perspective and 1% reality. But we see what we want to see. We see what we are taught to see. So when we are told this happened in Acts chapter 2, we make sure that everything we read and understand later conforms with that. But it's clearer and clearer to me every day, without hesitation, that there is simply no grounds to assume that there is only one gospel. They are obviously talking about 2 different gospels. And Paul was the minister to the Gentiles, but he also preached the kingdom gospel. Now, some mid-Acts right dividers will say Paul only preached one gospel since his conversion in Acts 9. I just don't see that. Paul preached the kingdom gospel clearly to me all the way through Acts 28. Matter of fact, the very last verse, he's still talking about preaching the kingdom of God. But something changed, I think, when Paul reached Rome and more revelation was given to him. The nation of Israel, had rejected the kingdom gospel. Paul was unable to heal. The sign gifts were disappearing, and I believe they did disappear. Even Paul himself couldn't heal Trophimus, that he left in Miletium sick. This is a transitional period. The book of Acts has to be viewed as a transition. If it's not, then, like I said, you look at the difference between the, theories of interpretation, such as covenant versus dispensational. It all comes down to the book of Acts. When you look at the various difference between the denominations, it all comes down to the book of Acts and how the book of Acts is translated, interpreted. Notice verse 26. Then Paul took them in, and the next day purified himself, and with them entered into the temple, to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. Now we see Paul doing exactly what was suggested by his Jewish brethren. Why would Paul do this if Paul had rejected the Mosaic Law? Why would Paul do this if he was not concerned that his Jewish brethren were thinking that he had rejected the kingdom gospel? Why would he do this if he didn't believe that? Obviously he did, and he was concerned about it. And he still went into the temple. So he did it publicly with other Jews to demonstrate that he was not teaching that the Jews, should forsake the law of Moses. And again, we suspect that this was a Nazirite vow that's mentioned in Numbers chapter number 6. That means that he was sacrificing a lamb as a sin offering. In Numbers 6:14, and he shall offer his offering unto the Lord one he-lamb of the first year without blemish for a burnt offering, and a ewe-lamb of the first year without blemish for a sin offering, and one ram without blemish for peace offerings. Paul's doing all these offerings and making sacrifices in the temple. I mean, how do you justify that? It's obvious that that the Jews were still very much under the law. So what about those who say that there is one gospel at this point? Making sacrifice in the temples hardly goes along with the gospel of grace. Why would Paul do this? Because the kingdom gospel required it. And that's the thing. That's why those who believe this way are called right dividers. Again, you're not dividing error from truth. You're dividing truth from truth. They're both truth. The kingdom gospel is true. The grace gospel is true. What James says is true in regards to keeping the law. And what Paul says in regards to we are free from the law is true. The question is, what audience are they addressing? James is addressing the nation of Israel, who were still very much under the law, who were still in the temple, who were still keeping sacrifices. And Paul was addressing Gentiles, who were free from the law. Notice in verse number 27, and when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, not in a good way, crying out, Men of Israel, help. This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place. And further, he's brought Greeks into the temple and hath polluted this place. So it didn't work. The 7 days, and when 7 days were almost ended, this is a reference to the time required under the Nazirite vow. In Numbers chapter 6, verse number 9, and if any man die very suddenly by him, he hath defiled his head of his consecration, then he shall shave his head in the day of his cleansing, and the 7th. So there's 7 days involved there. A little bit of I'm kind of going back and forth on what if it's referring to that or if it's referring to the Sabbath. I'm not sure there, but most commentators, I think I got that from Barnes, says reference to the time required under the Nazirite vow. And the Jews which were of Asia, who are the Jews? These are most likely the ones that had caused him all the problems in the previous chapters in Acts 19:9. But when divers were hardened and believed not, but spake evil of that way before the multitude, he departed from them and separated the disciples, disputing. So these divers that were hardened, these who caused the problems up in Ephesus, had followed him down into Jerusalem, apparently, and that wasn't the first time they had followed him from place to place. And their charges were that Paul teacheth all men everywhere against the people, that's the Jews, and against the law of Moses, and this place, that's referring to the temple, and further brought Greeks also in the temple, and hath polluted this. So understand that the context of their accusations is distinctly Jewish. There are two things that are obvious to me. They are accusing his message to the Gentiles. Follow this, okay? They are accusing his message to the Gentiles as the same that he was preaching to the Jews, which it wasn't. His message to the Gentiles did not require the keeping of the Mosaic Law, did not require circumcision, did not require abiding by the customs. So this accusation alone, at least in my opinion, proves that Paul preached two gospels, because they were only listening to the gospel that he gave to the Gentiles, not the one that he gave to the Jews. This should give a moment of pause to those who insist on one gospel. If there is only one gospel, then Paul is guilty of everything that he is being accused of. So why would Paul try to prove that he wasn't doing what he was really doing? I mean, again, read the text. It's obvious that Paul was preaching two gospels, and these people were confused. They were taking the gospel that he was preaching to the Gentiles and saying that he was preaching the same one to the Jews. He was not. He was still preaching the kingdom gospel to the Jews. And then secondly, the last charge that he brought Greeks into the temple was patently false, as Luke will explain in the next verse. In parentheses here, for they had seen before with him in the city Trophimus, an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. So again, everything they're leveling against Paul in these verses is wrong. He was not teaching every man everywhere against the Jews and the law and the temple. He was teaching the Gentiles the grace gospel, and it was not against the Jewish people, but he was telling them they didn't have to keep the law and they didn't have to make sacrifice. Again, they were accusing his message to the Gentiles, or they were confusing his message to the Gentiles as the same that he preached to the Jews. And this was not so. Just that very accusation and just Paul trying to prove that means that Paul preached two different gospels. I mean, come on. I did it. So I can't be too harsh there. And then notice in verse number 30, and all the city were moved, and people ran together, and they took Paul, and they drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. So they're responding with this pandemonium that he experienced in Ephesus from the, who was that? Demetrius, the silversmith, about in regards to Diana. They're just, people didn't know what was going on. They were just following the crowd. It's crazy. People are running together. I mean, who needs facts at this point? I mean, sounds like the morons that are running around today, doesn't it? Just that they get caught up in it, and they don't even know what's going on. They've got half-truths here and there. They're just, what? This guy is preaching against the Jews, and he's preaching we shouldn't keep the law of Moses. and of course now the whole city is moved. So this is not only, from what I can gather here, the believing Jews, but now the unbelieving Jews are involved. And that word "were moved" means agitated. They were agitated. And as a result, they took Paul and they drew him out of the temple. Now, you don't need to do your homework here, folks, because they were going to kill him. Their plan was to drag him out of the temple and stone him, just as they had done to Stephen. Again, we can't get caught up in this stuff. I sound like I'm talking about today's political situation, but I'm not. What does it say? Believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. They were agitated. That literally means stirred up. They were stirred up. They were whipped into a frenzy because of the accusations. They were religious zealots, make no doubt about it. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band, and that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. So their motivations are clear in regards to what they intended to do to Paul. They were going to do the same thing they did to Stephen in Acts chapter number 7. And this captain immediately took the soldiers and the centurions, and he ran unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left off beating Paul. Man, you think we got it bad. Then the chief captain came near, and he took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and what he had done. Well, now we see that Agabus was not a false prophet. In Acts 21:10, and as we tarried there many days, there came down from Judea a certain prophet named Agabus. And when he was come unto us, he took Paul's girdle and bound his own hands and his feet, and said, Thus saith the Holy Ghost, so shall the Jews at Jerusalem bind the man that owneth this girdle, and shall deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. Well, that's happened. That's happened. So, all right, guys. That's all I've got for today. Let me see, make sure everything's going well there. It almost looks like the screen's locked up, but I don't think it has. So, but God bless you guys. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow, Lord willing, at 6:30 a.m., and we will pick up at verse number 34.